So here's one of the handles, and it's cleaned up quite nicely. I tried a number of Dremel accessories trying to get it cleaned up, and I never really found one that I liked. We're dealing with some really complex curves here and corners that we're trying to maintain, and the drums that come with, you know, your Dremel accessories and the wire brushes and all that sort of thing, I couldn't get one to work without it potentially causing damage to another area that I would then have to go back and fix. So after trying several accessories, the best thing that I actually found was just doing it by hand. And so I've just got a piece of paper, and I fold it over the corner to kind of give it a little bit of rigidity, and sand. And this end grain does knock off the grit fairly quickly. So I just roll it over, sand some more, roll it over, sand some more. When it gets too big, just rip it off and start over. And this actually sanded down fairly quickly. I was actually pleasantly surprised. So the only other thing is we do have a sharp edge right here that obviously the roundover cannot get to. And for that, I'm just going to take the paper and kind of just knock that corner off and just freehand it. But to give you kind of a before and after, here is the other side, which of course I have not done yet, and the side we just did. So it takes, I'd say, about 15 minutes to clean it up, which isn't too bad. So I'm going to get the other side done, and then we're going to start sanding the top. Well, after a lot more sanding, we've got the other side done. And just to prove I am telling the truth, there are both sides. Now, I'm going to turn my attention to these edges here, and even though we rounded them over, we still need to sand them. Rather than using the random orbit sander, which we're going to use to do the top, trying to knock off edges and maintain a constant profile is kind of hard to do with random orbit. They have a tendency to dig in, and you'll get a few waves in there. So what I like to do is do it by hand. And what I have here is just some 1/4 inch foam. Okay, and you can usually find this in like the weather stripping section of a hardware store, and this actually is adhesive backed, but if you don't have adhesive, you can just you know, spray adhesive it on. But what I do is I cut my own sandpaper and put on there, and I do that because a sanding sponge, I don't like the grit that comes on those. It's just not a very high quality grit. I find it tends to knock off real easy. So I just keep a couple of sheets of this foam here, and then I can put whatever grit I want on it. And it's rigid enough to where it kind of maintains and holds a shape that I want, but also, you know, soft enough to where it will conform to whatever contour that I'm dealing with. So I'm going to keep sanding here, and also, again, remember these edges here. This is a good time to use the sanding sponge and go around and just kind of chamfer those edges and knock them off. Okay, well, I've got it sanded to 220 now, and one thing I want to mention about that, I'm using a random orbit sander. So even though the sandpaper is spinning, I'm going back and forth, but I'm also going forward and back. End grain does not have a direction like long grain does. So the grain is sticking up vertically, of course, and if you sand in one direction, even with a random orbit sander, the grain can merely lean over, and you don't want that. You actually want to sand that grain very evenly, very flat. You don't want it to just fold over. So I sand in pretty much every direction there is, diagonally, back and forth, forward and back, every direction. And the way to test that is just take your finger and rub it across, and you will feel if it's kind of prickly on one side. That means you've laid the grain over in that direction, and you don't want that. So just sand it basically very randomly until you have a very smooth surface, no matter which way you rub your hand. So up to 220 now, including the edges and this profile. And the profile, there's just no easy way of doing it. You just have to get the paper, kind of curl it up as best you can, and work that edge. So now I'm ready to go to some 320 paper, and I'm turning back to the sponge again. This time I'm just basically kind of wrapping it around there, and I'm going to sand it again in all different directions. And when we're done with that, we will finally be ready to do some finishing. Well, we finally come to the end, and we're ready to put a finish on. Now, finishes are a very controversial subject. You might as well be talking politics, really, because everybody has their favorite, and you don't want to disagree with that person. They tend to get a little irritated. And if you ask, say, 10 woodworkers what finish to use, you'll probably get 12 answers. Now, for me, as primarily a wood turner, I've been concerned with food safe finishes for many years. And I did my own research and figured out what I think is the best. Now, I encourage you guys to do the same. Don't just take this for face value. Do your research. Not all finishes are appropriate for every project. However, I would say probably 95% of all finishes are food safe. And what you have to understand is that it's not the finish that is the problem. It is the additives that they put in. So it's the dryers, the thinners, the solvents that make finishes spreadable, sprayable, and also that allows them to cure is what the culprit is. It's not the finish. So once all that stuff is dry or flashed off and you're left with the raw finish, 95% of those are food safe. In fact, the only ones that are really not food safe are the ones that are derived from food. And that includes like your walnut oils, vegetable oils. People think that because they come from food that they are food safe. It's the exact opposite. Think about it. What happens when you leave food out? It rots. Well, that's what's going to happen with your walnut oils and your vegetable oils. They will turn rancid over time. So if you want to use an oil finish, well, you want to use something like a mineral oil. Now, mineral oil is basically baby oil, but this is an unscented, odorless, colorless version of it. And you can pick it up at any drugstore. Now, I have a very good article here, and this is from popularwoodworking.com, and I've posted a link to it in the description. And you guys can read all about it yourselves, and again, make the distinction of what you feel is the best option for your particular project. So you may be saying, well, what about a salad bowl finish or a butcher block finish? Well, you could probably use one of those and it would be just fine. But what I'm trying to convey to you is that you don't necessarily need that. And you have to remember, these people are in the business of making money. So they're going to advertise it in such a way that appeals to you. And at the time of this filming, of this video right now, there is no FDA approved finish for wood. There is one for concrete, but not for wood. So what they do is they tend to, I don't want to say false advertise, but lead you to believe that their finish is FDA approved. This particular finish here says it is safe for food contact and contains FDA regulated ingredients. Well, almost every ingredient is FDA regulated. It's just the combination of which you put them together determines whether it's safe or not safe. So don't fall for this trap and then wind up spending 2 to 3 times as much for a finish that is no better than something that you can pick up at either a drugstore or your local hardware store. So with that being said, my finish of choice for this particular project is simply mineral oil. It's the easiest to apply, it's the easiest to reapply, which you will have to do, and it's also probably the cheapest. Now, what we're trying to do here is seal off the pores of the wood. Even though we've sanded to a relatively high grit, we still need to seal off those pores so that food and bacteria cannot hide down in there. And by using a mineral oil, if it's something that's not going to show scratches as much. If we were to use, say, a lacquer or a hard finish like a polyurethane, after cutting with a knife a few times, you're going to see those scratches, and eventually that finish is going to probably chip off, actually. And of course, you don't want that, not on a cutting board. So an oil finish is not going to show scratches, and every week or so, or after you wash it and it tends to dry out, you can simply reapply an oil finish, and you don't have to worry about blending it back together. It'll simply fill in the scratches, and it's going to look like new again. So let me show you the procedure that I'm going to use to apply it.